All right, hello all. I'm going to record today's PowerPoint in multiple sessions because it's long. I wanted to make sure I went through last week because when we're talking about culture, it can be a tricky culture and trying to merge it with the text that we're using. That can be tricky. So what I would really prefer to do is to maybe make this 2 or 3 parts so it's easier to digest, but I do want you to watch all of them. Okay, but we're going to talk about newborns. This is part of the PowerPoint I didn't get to talk about last week. Toddlers and early intervention, infants and toddlers. All right, so here's our agenda. We're going to talk about course updates, which there are a lot, reminders, review and recap, defining key terms. So I did that. I'm going to do that again. And then critical cultural differences in pregnancy and birth, because these are important. We're going to talk briefly about newborns across culture, then attachment, what is it, why does it matter, and an introduction to early intervention, which is, it's a human services field, so it's a helping field where we work with children birth to 3 years old with delays and disabilities. So course updates and reminders. I am still working on improving Blackboard, but I just wanted to make sure everything here is clear because I don't think it was. Here are your weekly expectations when I am able to do it. Watch the lecture recording, complete the exit ticket, and post to the discussion board. Those are what you need to be doing every single week. Course requirements. So these are separate, but they're also assignments. Field assignment. You should be in a field placement or have completed a field placement. That's only one student, and I know who that student is. So you should have timesheets, and eventually you'll have an evaluation. And then at the end, you will have a final reflection. That's like your final artifact. That's going to be based on what your experience is. So I highly recommend you record. You write your, journal entries, and next week I'm going to start making your discussion boards linked to the field placement experience. Next. I need to change something because I think this was unclear. Because I've been posting chapter quizzes, that's what everyone has been doing. People haven't noticed that I made a reflection requirement. Because I did that after the start of the semester, I think it's been confusing. So here's the deal, since everyone's been doing the quizzes anyways, the first 7 quizzes, chapters 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8, and then 9, I think, are going to, will need to be completed by the 31st. I have to look, don't quote me on what I just said, but there should be 7 quizzes completed by October 31st. And then there is a final exam. There are more quizzes in the second half, but let's focus on right now. And then you'll have a final exam. It will not be that long. It will likely be the same. It may be, wink, wink, the same questions from your quizzes. Fair? And I do correct those. I am going to be doing that this weekend. Blackboard, course due dates and the deadlines is updated. Field assignment, I believe I have made sure you have all the tools you need to complete that. Chapters 5 and 6 quiz. Moving forward, we're going to have multiple chapters covered because that's what we need to do. The syllabus has been updated, and I already put the due dates and deadlines. Skip that. All right, review and recap. We're going to take out birthing justice. That I'm going to let you watch on your own time. It's so important, and I think we need to be aware of it, but I can't focus too much on that particular topic. But we'll talk about key terms and then cultural differences. So here's what I talked about, what I put in the slides last week, but I want to talk about more. What is cultural competence? What have we been talking about in this course? And I realized that I did not define this, and I really need to. So it is talking about your knowledge, your behavior, and your affect. What are you doing? And how that impacts or influences your communication. Cultural competence means you engage in effective and appropriate communication with diverse people. You are aware and you accept, although I don't like acceptance because I don't need people to accept my differences. I need them to be aware and I need them to move forward. You can embrace it or not. I don't care if you accept it. It might not be your thing. And it focuses on just acquisition and mastery of as much information as you can glean or gather about cultural differences, about these uniquenesses from our own culture. What is more important is this idea of cultural humility. And really, how I think of cultural humility is having a growth mindset with cultural competence, understanding that you are never going to be done learning about the diverse world we live in. So that means you are committed to this ongoing reflection of your own behavior, of your own beliefs and values, that you are holding yourself accountable in situations where you don't engage in equitable or appropriate conversations with diverse cultures, that you're open to learning, you're authentic about your interests, you're authentic about who you are, and you recognize that you will never know everything because no one can. Even scholars who've been who study culture and diversity, there's so many different topics even within that. So really, it is understanding you will never know everything and that you're always going to be growing and trying to learn as much as you can. And this is critical. I mean, if you're going to work in schools or in a helping field in general, you are going to meet a lot of people from diverse backgrounds. You need to have this growth mindset. It is so important. As I said, we all should embrace cultural humility, and that's the truth. If you are not, then you're not going to be a culturally competent, you're not going to be culturally competent in your career. So let's talk a little bit about some cultural differences around genetics, pregnancy, and birth. So there are some hereditary diseases that are specific to certain cultures, races, or sex. So sickle cell anemia is most commonly found in African or African American individuals. Thalassemia is those of Asian ethnicity, which I struggle because Asia is such a large continent. And I think there are a lot of people who are from Asia that would say, I am much different from someone who's from India if I'm from China, right? And then Tay-Sachs is common to Jewish and Eastern European individuals. And then we know that there are some disorders or diagnoses that are common to, and specifically biological males, so hemophilia, Klinefelter syndrome, and then bio females only tend to have Turner's. It's just important to understand this because it also can represent this, if you understand that, let's say Tay-Sachs is something common to the specific group, then you might also recognize that if that person is looking for a community of support, then understanding that community might be found within this race or culture can be beneficial when you're speaking with your client or student. And then we know there are some developmental differences, and I am very hesitant. This is what the book says. I'm hesitant to even agree that this could be true, but there's this idea that African American, or Jamaican families develop motor skills sooner. And there's some belief that that's just because of they develop, they are typically larger and thus kind of necessarily need to develop those motor skills sooner. Again, this is where I kind of hesitate to say this is true. I'm certain there are outliers, and I'm certain that there are a lot of people who might argue this is specific to maybe one subculture within Japanese and Chinese children, but there are some unique physical and cultural differences that lead to later motor skill acquisition. However, that doesn't mean that there are developmental delays or disabilities. It just means their path was different. And this is why we hesitate when talking about using normative charts across cultures. And then there was this belief for a long time that if you were not white, Western middle class, and you did not follow the path of these normative charts, that you must have been delayed or have a disability. That we know now is not true. This is more because these normative charts were normed on white middle class children, not the diverse world we live in today. Yeah, so there are outliers in all research. We are constantly learning in how research was conducted, realizing conclusions that can't be drawn to all populations. For me, what I think is best and how to really use this information is have this in the back of your mind, but always go into your profession, wherever you are, looking at the individual child or the whole family and learning about them before you try to use this research to your advantage, because it might not be helpful in the end. So this is also something I think is very important. And again, I know that this particular course, we have you intern in schools, but I believe it's specific, it's also a human services course. And you will almost definitely experience or work with individuals who are experiencing drug abuse or their families are experiencing drug abuse. I happen to live in the second or third, no, it might be second now. We in New Hampshire, have the highest percentage of drug overdoses in the country, and it's opioids. That really speaks to this larger issue. There was a long time where people felt like addiction was a lower class issue. Thankfully, and I say that sarcastically and frustratingly, the opioid crisis has made it very clear that drug addiction affects everybody. And I can say that as someone living in New Hampshire, where we are, yes, we're growing more diverse, thankfully. But New Hampshire and Maine are in the top 3 of the highest mortality rate for drug overdose and the highest overdose rate in general. And New Hampshire and Maine are both predominantly white, which means the drug epidemic is everyone's problem. And I also want to say, as I'm talking about this topic, a lot of people from where I'm from do not see addiction as disease. They see addiction as an individual problem. I do not feel that way. And I say this not saying that you need to believe what I believe. I'm saying that if you plan on being a teacher or in a helping field, if you assume that addicts are not involved, are not suffering from a disease, you are not ever going to help that addict or their child. I just need to say that now, because what they are going through is a disease. Once they have become addicted, it is almost impossible to recover. And what people also don't know, and this is what becomes incredibly frustrating to me, is that rehabilitation, though people say, oh, they can just go to rehab, most rehabilitation centers, treatment centers, are for profit, which means they are really only available to those who can afford it. So there is a large gap in treatment. If you are poor, if you don't have insurance, you better hope there's some government program that can actually send you to treatment, or you have some rich family member, because otherwise you are going to be thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in debt recovering, while also recovering from an addiction. So that's my piece on drug use and addiction. I think what's important is when we're talking about prenatal development and addiction, because there are plenty of parents, sadly, who are addicted while they are pregnant. When this is happening, we show empathy. We refrain from judging, because this will only bring that person back to that behavior. There is going to be a threat to that parent of Child Protective Services. You make sure they know this is for the child, but Child Protective Services, DCYF, depending on where you are, their main goal is always to reunify families. So if that parent is committed to getting healthy and getting help, they will be with their children. And what we have learned is that we need both medications and counseling or therapy to improve outcomes for women who are suffering from addiction and pregnant. I have a lot of thoughts on this issue, and this is just, I've had people in my family who are addicts. I've learned a lot about addiction because I know it is hereditary, so I need to understand myself. And I find that the way addicts are treated is just disgusting to me personally. Okay, next. Childbirth, differences across cultures. So this is what I want to make clear. There are very clear differences, and I'm going to fix this. Lamax, silly. Between Western and non-Western cultures. Western cultures, more sterile, more medical, at least years ago. Non-Western cultures, more natural, more family-oriented. We're still moving towards this natural childbirth movement in the US, but most non-Western cultures have been engaging in natural labor and delivery for years. I'm not going to go too far. You can read this, but this is what I want to make clear, is that Western cultures made childbirth a medical procedure for many years. And still there's a lot more use of C-sections or medical tools that would never be used in non-Western cultures. And I think one of the interesting pieces that was brought up in the book is how in the Yucatan, there's this fathers are encouraged to watch the mothers suffer through childbirth so they can gain this respect over what these mothers have been through. And in truth, that's good and bad. I hate that we have to watch the suffering, but also it is accepting that childbirth is intense, and it takes a toll on every woman's body. It doesn't matter how long or short the labor and delivery process is. It's a toll. And so it is so interesting how these cultures have viewed it for years, and only now are we in the US starting to embrace some of these very older customs. And yeah. Also, birthing rooms. This was a question on this was a question on a different quiz. I'm going to say a birthing room. Be sure you know what that is, because there's some confusion. A birthing room is a very specific place that has emerged recently in Western hospitals. All right, multicultural perspectives on care. Response to crime. So here's the big difference I want to note here. I'm not going to read all this. Again, I made this PowerPoint so you would have the information, because I knew I wouldn't be able to discuss it. What I want to point out is that the biggest difference to how different cultures respond to crying is how adults respond to it. And there are many cultures, Korean American was one that was introduced where mothers are just with their babies at all times. So if there's the slightest upset, they will be holding them immediately. So there's not even this crying piece that might emerge. Whereas in white American cultures, we wait for the baby to cry. We are trying to foster more and more independence, but also this closeness. And that's because we are such an independent, individualized society. Um, but there's some kind of different schools of thought where if a baby is colicky, your response is not going to change how well that baby soothes. But there's a lot of positive outcomes that result from these unique responses in Korea or even Italian American, where they are always around to soothe, always. Breastfeeding. Okay. Big difference here. Again, this is a quiz question. Breastfeeding is the ideal for many reasons. Breastfeeding is linked to a lower likelihood of obesity. What I want to make clear is that formula became popular when it was advertised in the US. People who use formula now typically are those who can't breastfeed because they're not physically available. So something that we've noticed in the US is that lower SES, so often, unfortunately, African American families, Latino, Latinx, Latina, have to use formula because they're not always with their babies. Now, I'm careful not to include Hispanic. I'm careful on commenting Hispanic and Latino families because I know how important family is and closeness with babies, but it could be that another family member is caring for that infant while the parent is working. So that baby is being cared for, but they might not have the ability to be breastfed. It is actually much safer in non-Western, underdeveloped countries to breastfeed because in those countries, we know water is contaminated. So that means using water to mix with formula is not safe, but also bottles need to be sterilized. We have dishwashers. We have dishwashers that can do that. That is not the case in underdeveloped countries. So breastfeeding is really the ideal. And unfortunately, formula companies have started to advertise to underdeveloped nations and people are starting to use it. And this is not really a safe practice. So just something to be aware of. Okay. But as the natural childbirth movement has emerged, this breastfeeding movement has also emerged. Okay. I'm going to pause here because it's 9 o'clock, almost 9 o'clock. Attachment is going to be a new topic. And I've gone through a lot of text, and that's a lot to digest. So we'll stop here and we'll start again after hopefully I have my meeting.